And finally, for our last performance of the day, a musical portrayal of the book named Zen, whose author is someone who possesses such rare talent that the first book she ever wrote, The Six Spellmakers of the Rabji Street, was made a compulsory read in many schools and even made into a play. Such is the personality of Miss Shabnam Minwalla, whose passion is writing fiction for children and young adults.
Zen is a tale that transcends the boundary of time. It holds not just one, but two coming of age stories. Zen is a 17-year-old girl living in Mumbai in 2019, a time when protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act were common. Zen finds herself roped into these protests. Zainab is a 19-year-old girl living in Bombay in 1935 and plays a small yet vital role in the struggle for independence. Today, we're going to be depicting Zen's story in the form of song.
Well, no, that's not right. Yes. I'm conflicted between what's wrong and right. The continuous struggle against the profane lost day right. There's so much I wanna say, but so little I can do. My words, I'll find a way. I'll reveal the truth. I'll try to untangle the dragon of life, and maybe along the way I'll find true love. My best friend Minka wants me to fight. There's somebody that I know that I like. His name is Yash and I love him too. I can't stand being suppressed. I wanna break through. I know what I wanna be, what I'm destined to do. I just need to make sure I follow through. I'm determined to play a part, lend my voice, bring my country to unity, let it rejoice. Amidst the chaos, my heart sways. The years of flow light my way. I know who I was, ready for who I've become. A force engine, my story's begun. Sister will always be cheering me on, my rock to depend upon. And come an intelligent friend, she'll make sure our obstacles bend.
Are we killing our constitution with the CAA? We're becoming a country where only one kind of person and one kind of view is tolerated.
Then there's the chance encounter with Yash, who's led my feelings on a merry dance. This feeling of enchantment makes my heart race. He's got my soul bewitched and caught in a trance.
My sister estranged, my family broken, my loyalties conflicted, my existence is a ruin. I feel like my life has been uprooted and stolen. I know I love Zen, and I'll fight the world till we make it.
Know what's wrong and I can make it right. I won't stop working till we win this fight. I'll learn from Zainab's journey. With your shall write my own story. Know what I wanna be, what I'm destined to do. I just need to make sure I follow through. I'm determined to play a part, lend my voice, bring my country to unity, let it rejoice. Amidst the chaos, my heart sways. The years of love light my way. I know who I was, ready for who I've become. A porcelain chain, my story's begun.
Thank you for that awe inspiring musical. Shabnam Minwalla is a Mumbai holic, an ardent sari shopper, a murder mystery buff, and an occasionally frazzled mother of three. She has spent all her life with words, working as a journalist with the Times of India, writing columns and features in various publications and non-fiction books about facets of Mumbai. What she is best known for are her books for children and young adults. Miss Minwalla's popular books include Zen, The Six Spellmakers of Dorabji Street, What Maya Saw, Sarah Zariwala is Afraid, and the Rib Tickling Nimmi series. She has won numerous awards, including the Author Award, the Neve Book Award, the Valley of Words Award, and the Ata Galata Bangalore Literature Festival Prize. Miss Minwalla teaches creative writing in a Mumbai college and has conducted workshops in schools around the country. Her new book, The Body in the Swimming Pool, is an entertaining murder mystery set in a Mumbai high rise. I would now like to request our trustee and correspondent, Mr. Srinivasan R., to give a bouquet to Miss Minwalla. Thank you, sir. For the last moderating session, I would like to call on Akshara Sendal as the moderator, please.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, respected dignitaries, guests, and audience. My name is Akshara Senthil, and I'm a student of Class 10. Today, I'm going to be moderating a session with distinguished author Mrs. Shabnam Minwalla about her literary paragon, Zen. Ma'am, before we begin, I'd just like to say I found your book highly engrossing, and I just could not put it down. You've managed to weave the themes of humor, heart, and history seamlessly into a remarkable book. Truly, I'm honored and delighted to be moderating this session with you today.
And I'm totally thrilled to be here with you, to be here in the school, and to be here in Chennai because I'm a daughter-in-law of Chennai. I'm married to a Chennai boy and then whisked him away to Mumbai. So
Ma'am, my first question for you today is, what inspired you to write Zen? Was there a particular event, person, or thought that sparked the story?
I think a couple of things, and this is a story I've told very often, but about 5-6 years ago, one day I woke up and turned on my phone and checked WhatsApp, as we tend to do these days, and I found mysteriously that I'd been added onto a chat called Love Letters. And I was very thrilled, because at my age, when you're put onto a chat called Love Letters, it's kind of exciting. And it turned out that it was started by my cousin's husband, the chat, and there's a story behind it. My cousin, she's a second cousin, actually. When her grandmother died, just before she died, she called my cousin Monisha and she said, "Come here." And this was a day before she died, and then she stuffed this little package into Monisha's hand. And things were chaotic in Monisha's life. She dumped the packet in a cupboard, and years later was cleaning the cupboard and opened the packet and found, to her absolute delight and surprise, that in the packet were pages from her grandmother's diary that her granny had torn out and preserved. And the diary was from the time the grandmother was 19 years old. So this was the diary of a Muslim girl, 19 years old, 1935. And I think what Monisha found, and what even I found, was that the tone was incredibly modern. And we all have preconceived notions about what women, Muslim women especially, in those days would be like. You know, I imagined a very cloistered life, some sort of parda, if not physical, mental. But this woman was living quite a dashing life. She was going to fortune tellers. Fortune tellers were telling her things like, love will come into your life. And then she'd pass rude remarks in her diary like, what rubbish, where will love come into my life? And the interesting thing was, over time we realized that there was a boy in her life, a Hindu boy who seemed to be living in the building. She never gave away too many details, but there were these tantalizing little lines. For example, when the first time she sees the picture of the boy she's engaged to, she writes in her diary, "I want to cry. He's not a patch on my..." And then the boy that she's in love with. Or she'll be looking out of the window and she'll say, "He has not forgotten me. He looked up at me. His rhythmic walk is glorious." And I think all of this really astounded us. We hadn't expected it. And there were also some poems from the boy. Notably, there was one poem, when this girl is getting married, as she did get married, she very insensitively, I feel, invited this boy to her wedding. gave him an invitation card, and he's returned the card to her with this line, to she who is Zalim, Zalim being cruel in Hindi. And then he's written his last love poem at the back of the card. So I think this diary opened my eyes, but I didn't have the courage to write a book set in 1935. It just felt too daunting. I didn't know anything about 1935. So I sat on it, though Monisha kept saying, do something with this. And then when the anti-CAA protests were happening, at that point it sort of came to me that maybe I'd do a story about two girls set in two critical times in India's history. And in a way, that's where Zen was born.
That was a truly delightful story, ma'am. Thank you for sharing that with us. My second question to you is, what made you choose both Bombay in 1935 and Mumbai in 2019 as settings for the story?
So 1935, I think because this woman's diary was in 1935, I just decided to keep it that. I could have chosen any year, but I felt, why not 1935? And some of the events she talks about are sort of connected. She mentions, trouble in Germany, Ethiopia being, the bombing of then Abyssinia by Italy. So it just felt like the right setting, and she lived in Mumbai. I had also at that point written a book on Kolaba, which is the area I've grown up in. So, to me, suddenly that world became very clear because I'd done so much historical research. So I could imagine this girl or my grandmother. They were sisters, the woman who wrote this diary and my grandmother. So to me, it was very fascinating to imagine them navigating that city. So I think that setting was very clear. The Mumbai of 2019, I chose because I lived through that time. I saw the city, and I live very close to Gateway of India, and one of the big CAA protests happened right over there. So I used to go and observe it quite often. So again, it was a ready-made setting for me. And I felt, to have a ready setting, it just gives you an immediate backdrop that's very authentic and real. And I'm a real Mumbai-holic, as my bio says. So Mumbai to me is always the place.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. My third question to you is, every chapter in Zen begins with an excerpt from a song, rhyme, or newspaper cutting. How did you choose those to give a fascinating introduction to every chapter?
It was an experiment. I didn't know if it would come out. I just started playing around with it. And when I was writing the first chapter, this is the chapter when Yash, who's an NRI boy growing up in Chicago, has just come to Bombay for a family wedding. He's in a grumpy state. And I'm sort of talking about the family and how they've lived in Chicago all their lives, but they always say India is home. And at that point, while I was writing it, the words of this Hindi song, Meri Desh Ki Dharti, started echoing in my ears. So I just put it down. And at every chapter, different songs were just playing in my head for a bunch of chapters. So I just put them down. And I thought it would be fun to, I wanted Zen to be more than a book. I wanted it to be as 3D an experience as possible, which is why I thought music, poetry, newspaper cuttings would add to the sense of belonging to the ages. The other reason I used this device is, when you're talking about two girls, one 1935, one 2019, you want those two people, they were both set physically in the same place. So I wanted to change the time, the feel of the times in different ways. And I think music was a very obvious way.
Yes, ma'am. That really helped me understand every chapter. My fourth question to you is, what was the biggest challenge that you faced while writing the book from multiple perspectives? Did you ever find it hard to ensure each character's voice felt distinct and genuine? And were there any moments when you struggled to decide which perspective a particular scene should be written from?
So all my books have female protagonists, and this is something I have 3 daughters, so they are quite pleased about it. But I have one nephew, and he's always saying, Shabnam Faiji, can't you have a boy who's speaking in your book for once? So I really tried to do that with Zen. Yash, in a way, begins the book, but I think I take away the perspective from him fairly quickly because the female perspective comes more easily to me. It was difficult. It was especially difficult to do the 1935 voice because, again, like I'm saying, I'm not a historian. So how I developed that voice was really by reading every single newspaper through 1935 and into 1936 just to understand their lives. And I read a lot of literature set in the 1930s just to understand what kind of words were big, you know. For example, the word fetching was very popular in the 1930s. Or, so, and it's very interesting because when you look at Google, that thesaurus, there is a graph which shows you how popular a word is in different periods of time. So I actually started looking for words which were popular in the 1930s. And it was great fun. It was a game I was playing with myself. I didn't think any reader would come and say, you used this word and it wasn't popular in 1930. But why not?
Yes, ma'am. My next question to you is, having been a journalist for the first part of your career, which do you prefer, writing books for children and teens or journalism? What do you feel is the biggest difference between the two?
I loved being a journalist. I mean, I absolutely loved it. Because the wonder of journalism is you wake up every morning and you have no idea what the day holds for you. You could end up covering an earthquake, which is what has happened. You can end up covering tragic accidents, or you could end up covering this really heartwarming story that, sort of makes you believe in human beings all over again. Or one day you can just even be sent off to interview Shah Rukh Khan. You honestly don't know. And that kind of excitement, I was addicted to. But then, very quickly, within a 2-year period, I got 3 children. And it became very difficult to be hanging around on budget night and covering railway accidents when those 3 reluctant mouths had to be given their doodhi and their mashed potato. And for a long time, I didn't do any writing, and I was getting grumpier and grumpier. And then one day I thought, let me try and write a book. But I never wanted to write books for children at all. I was not in that state of mind. I wanted to write murder mysteries. Lots of dead bodies and blood splatters was what I had in mind. But to my shock and horror, the first line that came out was, in Cozy Castle, there lived a dragon, a court jester, 2 princesses, and an old crone who may or may not have had magical powers. And I looked at this line and I thought, this is not a murder mystery. But I allowed it to go, and I had a book for children. And then an editor contacted me and asked me for another book. And now I'm 15, 16 books old, and I feel quite startled I have another career that I never intended.
Yes, ma'am. For someone who didn't like writing children's books originally, you're certainly excellent at it. My next question for you is, what is your writing process and how do you overcome writer's block?
Okay, so there was a time when I initially started when writer's block was a big thing. I mean, in a way, I really sort of gave it a lot of importance. And when I was a student, when I studied journalism in the US, I did a writing class, and we had 2 whole sessions on writer's block, and people talked about it, and it terrified me the way people would talk about it. There was a classmate I had, and he literally used to cut up his book narrative into like little chits. He'd write, maybe he'd say conclusion, then he'd say tragic part or whatever. He'd stick them on a dartboard, then he'd blindfold himself and throw a dart. And wherever the dart landed, that's the bit he would write. And I was really frightened that this kind of paralysis would strike me. And it did initially, but I think now I'm really strict with myself. Every day I wake up and I write. I write on flights, I write at airports, I write in buses. And sometimes I write horribly. It's absolute crapola, and it all has to be deleted. But at least I don't ever get the feeling that I'm stuck. Because when you're writing, however bad it is, your mind is constantly thinking. So when you're in a traffic jam, when you're somewhere, the mind is, it's saying, what do I do with this horrible stuff I've written? And when you go back, you can rectify it.
Yes.
So that's writer's block. I don't allow it to be. I think that's my short answer.
Yes, ma'am. That advice certainly will help the aspiring authors in the audience. My next question to you is, all the characters in Zen are vividly and descriptively portrayed. How did you develop their personalities? Were you inspired by the personality of anybody that you know?
I think the initial books one does write characters in one's life. But by the time I'd reached Zen, I'd exhausted a lot of the characters in my life. I mean, of course, you pick up traits from the people around you. I think what happens is, as Vikas mentioned, your characters grow with the book. And because I spent 3 years on Zen, writing and rewriting, and I'm a big believer in rewriting. So almost nothing in my first draft will ever see the light of day except maybe the names of the characters. literally everything changes. And with every rewrite, you tend to rewrite your characters and they become more and more real. And I think especially with the character of Yash, okay? So when I wrote Yash, initially, I hated him. Okay? He was somebody I had this huge antipathy towards, and it really bothered me because I kept feeling this is a love story. And I love Zen, so I have to give her a boy who is not actively monstrous. And why would Zen love Yash if he is so monstrous? And so I think with every rewriting, Zen changed, Yash changed, Abha changed, and in the diary, of course, Zainab's character came very clearly, I think, thanks to the diary. But her sister Fatima's character, she's a kind of a Twilight character. She's very unpleasant initially, and it kept bothering me. Why is she doing what she does? And the answer came to me very late in the book. So your characters do not fully reveal themselves to you, and then when they do, the horrible thing is they take over the book. And then they won't let you. So my editor would keep messaging and say, "Is the book done?" I said, "1 month, I'm writing the last chapter." And oh no, Zen and Yash would go and have another fight or do something really obnoxious to each other, and another 10,000 words would have to be written. So at some point you lose control. The characters do take over.
Yes, ma'am, thank you for that. My next question is, what do you feel is the most important element of writing stories for children and teenagers?
I think relatability. I do believe that when you write for children and teenagers and in some way reflect their lives, maybe not the nitty gritties, but the wider issues, the wider concerns that they live within, that is essential.
Yes, ma'am. My final question for you today is, if you were to write a letter to Zen or any of your protagonists, what would you tell them about their journey and choices?
So, because this is two love stories essentially, the old love story, I think, for me it was very clear how it would end. There wasn't really a question in my mind. And I guess that given the time she lived in, Zena probably made the right choice. With Zen, it was really difficult, okay? Because this was a love story that had many ways it could go. Practically speaking, and having seen the world, and having 3 daughters who kept screaming at me and saying, "There can be only one ending to your book or we will not talk to you." It was very scary. But, when you're an adult, you don't see the world in black and white. So I decided to have a midway ending. If I were to write to Zen now and about her choices, and people keep asking me if I'll do a sequel, and honestly I say no, because I really don't know what the right thing for Zen would be. But if I wrote to her, it's a question of head over heart, right?
Yes, ma'am.
At your age, I would say head. At my age, I would say heart. I don't know if that's the correct thing, though.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to answer our questions. I'm sure the audience found it insightful.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Akshara. The floor is once again open to our spectators, during which they may ask one question each. Please assemble on the left side of the stage.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Myra, and my question is, would you consider Zen to be a modern romance or a more broader story exploring broader socio-political and historical themes?
Well, I would like to think of it as a broader story. Well, it does have, it's not entirely modern because Zainab's story is not. Well, Zainab is a modern woman in some ways, but her story is not a modern one. The choices she makes are not entirely. Well, I think there are many things in the book that I hope are relevant across ages. There's, of course, love and forbidden love, difficult love. And whenever I go to schools, I ask the children, what is that one wall that you would find very difficult to cross in your romance? And I think every age has that. And that changes, right? It actually changes with every city. So when I go to Delhi, children will say, they will talk about religion and caste. In Mumbai, it's very interesting, but children very often talk about very practical considerations, like economic considerations, or one girl stood up and said, I would find it very difficult to be in love with somebody who had a disability. So I think the questions remain the same, the answers change. It also talks about, I think, prejudice. And human beings, for some sad reason, seem wired for prejudice. We build walls. If one wall breaks, we'll quickly find another place to build walls. And this we see. But for me, the contemporary message today is, as a society, we're becoming so polarized that we find it difficult to talk across the barriers. And for me, I'm not saying one side is right, another side is right. I have my own beliefs, but this book is not about that. This book is really about saying, talk across your differences. And for me, just making Zen and Yash talk about the important issues was the really difficult part to write. And that, for me, is the modern part, and I think the other bits are the perennial issues.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sure.
Good afternoon, I'm
Hi.
Jyotsna, and quite a number of your books include humor. Can you explain the role of humor in your books?
Okay, so actually, you asked me a question about writing for children and young adults, and I talked about issues and themes. Or the single most important thing I think I've answered you wrong is to make the book fun and entertaining, and to make it, something you want, a world you want to go into. That you put the book down, and you want to return to it. And I think humor plays some role. So even if it's a serious book, even if it's a murder mystery, and I write many murder mysteries, and my husband gets very angry. Why don't you make it properly dark? Why are your characters always passing, joking? But I feel children and young adults do respond to it. And I have a couple of pure humor books. Humor I find very difficult to write because what I find funny, you might not find funny. But while writing the books, I have a great time. Like, I'm giggling myself. I'm sitting and disgracing myself in aeroplanes, laughing away. People must be thinking this 50-plus-year-old woman cackling while she writes on the computer is a scary being. But I think humor sort of brightens our lives, right? And I hope I get it right. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Anirudh. And how did you choose the vivid and colorful chapter names in Zen?
Again, that was an experiment. So now in the old story, the Zainab story, and the boy she loves, whom she calls K, though his name is Khupchand or maybe not Khupchand, we never really find out. So K and Zainab, K is a freedom fighter of a kind. He's using Zainab to pass messages. Zainab is part of this Borat Muslim trading family, and her brother's also involved in the freedom struggle. So I wanted a device where he is connected with her family business. And I thought so I was reading up a lot about the important businesses in 1930 in India, and the dye business was very big. So he uses color names to pass on messages. And again, I thought, let me try chapter names. Let me try chapter names, which are colors. And I had the most fun because, there are days when you wake up and you don't feel like writing, but you can always research color names. And I spent an obscene amount of time researching names of colors, but I had so much fun. And, the design of the book, the inside, the page 2 is all the colors sort of listed there. And I think it added a very happy touch to the book. Also, it gives me a nice message to write. When I sign the book, I can write, "May your life be full of colors," or something like that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sure.
Hi, ma'am. I'm Abhinav. So, who is your favorite character in Zen and describe them in one word?
That's cruel, no? It's a very fat book. How can I have only
Okay,
one
one
favorite
sentence.
character? Okay, so the character who gave me maximum trouble, and actually whom I've done like a full circle with, as I've said, is Yash. So I've grown to be fond of him. After hating him, I've realized he's, fine. I can live with him. Character I feel closest to is Zen. I mean, this is a very boring answer. But to get into her head took me a lot of time. So I wanted a shy person, but a person with a lot of nasty little thoughts in her head, nasty, funny, cutting thoughts, but that nobody sees. So, so the big question for me was, why does Zen love Yash? Why does Yash love Zen? And the answer came to me when I was writing the book. They're both people who don't open up with others, but they open up with each other. So while writing Zen's character, I actually had a little exercise. Whenever Zen talks to anybody except Abha, she talks in very few words. Her sentences are tiny. When she talks to Yash, they're long, flowing sentences. So, getting into Zen's head took me 2 years. When she came alive, I was so grateful. So I guess she's my favorite. But the other character I do kind of really love is Fatima, who's Zainab's sister. And like I said, starts out very nasty, and you only understand what's going on with her right at the end. But over time, I loved her.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sure.
Good afternoon. My name is Ovia, And my question is, if you could write a book in another genre, what would it be?
My favorite is murder mystery. Favorite number two is horror. Then maybe humor and love story is my last. Because I don't think I understand love and I found it very, very difficult to write this. Um, so I promptly after Zen returned to my comfort zone of lots of murder. I did body in the swimming pool, nice corpse in a swimming pool, calmed me down immensely. I've done another humor book which is coming out in a few months. And now I'm writing a big fat murder mystery, which is an exploration of memory and class. So it's very difficult. I'm finding it very tricky to write, very challenging. I have another editor waiting, sadly, somewhere in Delhi. But that's what I'm doing at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Maria.
Hi.
My question is, which character do you prefer, Zen or Zainab?
I feel closer to Zen. I find Zainab is more admirable. But Zen is like me, overthinking, double thinking, worrying. Zainab is very clear. And I think to have survived and to have done more than what her life description was in 1935, she had to be like that, and she is. So I find her very admirable. I found her an easy character to write. Zen a difficult character. So, I mean, I love Zen more. I find Zainab somebody I'd want my daughters to be like. Does that answer your question? I don't know.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi.
I have a question. How do you write a book? Do you have like a structured routine on how you write a book, or do you just let inspiration guide you?
So most of my ideas can be written in 30 seconds. You know, so for example, I wrote a book called What Maya Saw. It's a fantasy mystery set in Bombay. And how it was born was I was writing a book. My old college had asked me to write a book about 140 years of the college. So one afternoon, I was sitting in the library and I was doing research. It was a summer day. Exams are just over. So it was me and a librarian who was dozing away. And suddenly, I looked up and my heart literally stopped beating. Okay, I was so afraid. I almost just threw down my computer and ran out shrieking because I saw, or I thought I saw, a girl standing near the window. And what I thought I saw was that there were horns coming out of her head. And luckily I looked again and realized it was not true. And luckily I didn't disgrace myself. But that 10 seconds of fear stayed with me so that 8 or 9 years later, when I thought, okay, what book will I write today? The Girl with the Horns popped up in my head, and a whole 80,000 word book was born out of that. So ideas come from everywhere. They come in little nuggets. The important thing is to hold on to your ideas. I have a little book and I scribble random things and go back to it when I'm feeling blank. And so inspiration is actually, if you keep your eyes open in this room, you will have found at least 5 possible books to write. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. I'm
Hi.
Anita. So I have a question for you. Have you ever gotten confused about which Zainab you were writing on in the chapter?
I'll tell you how I wrote the book, okay? So for the first part, I would say for the first 1/3 of the book, I was writing the 2 bits parallelly. Then I realized that Zainab's story was coming much more easily. So I just sat and wrote the diary entries till the end. And I just went ta 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 ta. And then that was done. Then I went back to Zen. Then I wrote all of Zen. Then I started putting diary into modern. And then I changed everything because I wanted the two to be a conversation also. They are standalone stories, but they're also talking to each other in some ways with colors, with geographical landmarks, with themes, with different choices that the girls make. So I didn't get confused because to me, they were living beings. They look different, they feel different. But I really also wanted that similarity. So, they're both late all the time. They both have untidy hair. They are both creatures of their own determination. They're stubborn beings. So I didn't get confused because I think I wrote like this.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Anika, and I wanted to ask you, how do you encourage the younger generation to engage in political issues when the stories they read may not directly affect them?
It's tricky, okay? Especially from the kind of schools like, for example, my daughters go to. It really bothers me that they were more involved in Black Lives Matter than in what was happening in Kashmir. It actually drove me batty. Um, I don't know. You write more works that connect them to what is happening in the world around them. You force them to think. Zen was my attempt at doing that. The current book I'm writing, The Murder Mystery, is also my attempt to doing that. How successful one is, one doesn't know. As a mummy, I keep ranting. That is not successful at all. But yeah, you try and you hope.
Thank you.
I would now like to invite Dr. C. Chandramouli to present the memento to the distinguished author, Ms. Minwalla. Thank you, sir, and thank you, Ms. Minwalla, for that wonderful session.